Hey everyone, this is Brown at Eye of Brown, and tonight we are going to be talking about Brawl in Cell Block 99. This 2017 movie was directed by S. Craig Zahler, the same guy who did the slow burn horror western Bone Tomahawk from 2015. And if I had to describe Bone Tomahawk to someone, I would describe it as, say, if Toby Hooper, the director of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, had stepped in to do John Ford's The Searchers, which is a classic John Wayne Western. But whereas this movie is what would have happened if S. Craig Zahler had stepped in to do a movie set in the world of Frank Miller's Sin City, albeit with Vince Vaughn in the lead role of Marv. And so this was a very unique movie to sit down and watch, because much like Bone Tomahawk before it, there's a very slow burn approach, but rather than say things taking a left turn into horror territory, there's a very grindhouse aspect to it, in the sense of the characters, they feel like something that you would have seen on a regular basis in exploitation or crime drama movies from say the 70s or early 80s. And Vince Vaughn gives what is easily his best performance in this movie as the lead character of Bradley Thomas. And I'm very glad to have finally gotten to see this movie, because I didn't get a chance to see it until long after it had come out. But yeah, so the story of Cell Block 99 centers on the character of Bradley Thomas, as played by Vince Vaughn, who's having a very bad day. He's lost his job as an auto mechanic. Times are tough, so they're cutting people left and right. But he's also found out that his wife Lauren, as played by Jennifer Carpenter, has been cheating on him for at least 3 months behind his back. And so in what's easily one of the most memorable moments in the movie, Bradley tells Lauren to go inside, and once she does, he destroys her car with his bare hands. And yes, that is Vince Vaughn actually doing the damage there. It's not CGI. So once that memorable display of rage is over with, he goes inside and he and his wife talk, and turns out the two of them have been in a rather strained relationship as of late, because unfortunately their first attempt at having a child didn't go well. Namely, the child was stillborn, and so they're both dealing with depression from that. They were kind of tiptoeing around actually talking about it. So now they're actually talking about it, but they realize that if they want to have another shot at having a kid, there need to be some changes made. One, the two of them actually need to be on the same page, and in terms of communication, as well as they're going to need to make some major changes financially. And so Bradley tells Lauren that he'll call up his old friend Gil, who's a reasonably big-time drug dealer. And in the words of Bradley himself, I'm just delivering packages for a friend. And so the two of them agree that if this works out, they'll try and make another attempt at having a kid. And so short time later, things actually are improving, financially as well as emotionally between the two of them. They have, in fact, managed to make progress on kid number 2, seeing as how Lauren is pregnant at this point. And they're in a much nicer house, and it's sort of, isolated and out of the way, where, they're not going to be bothered by anyone. And also, his job as a drug courier, while it's not without its risk, it's very rewarding financially. And so one day, Gil calls Bradley in to meet Eleazar and a couple of his couriers. And Eleazar is a fellow drug dealer who's wanting to make some changes himself. And one of those changes involves getting into business with Gil. And the two of them agree to make this transaction. And if it's successful, it would be very financially lucrative for both parties. And Bradley is very reluctant to get involved with Eleazar's people because he can pick up on the fact that at least one of them's using. And so at Gil's insistence, though, Bradley reluctantly goes along with the Eleazar's couriers to make the transaction. And initially things seem to be going okay. They get the packages, but at a certain point, Bradley picks up on the fact that something's off. And so he tells the other two, hey, ditch the packages in the water, we'll come back for them later. But they ignore him and walk right into the arms of a police ambush. And so Bradley gets involved in all this because he had the chance to actually make a clean getaway. But, this whole, honor amongst thieves mentality sort of kicks in. And so he goes in, but instead of helping his two fellow couriers out, he actually helps the police out and ends up getting one of the couriers killed and wounding the other, but he himself is arrested as well. And he ends up being interrogated, and he's actually given an opportunity to have either a reduced sentence or to walk free altogether if he'll testify as to who he's working for as well as who he knows in the drug trade. But Bradley basically says, I don't know anything. I'm not going to give you any names. And so he's looking at a 4 or 5 year sentence, but instead he ends up getting a 7-year sentence because the judge has wanted to make an example of him. And so, he tells his wife, what's going on, and he asks her not to bring their daughter once she's born, to come see him because he doesn't want her first interaction with him to be, looking through a glass window. And so she agrees, and that, she'll, abide by his wishes, and that she'll be waiting for him, once he gets out. And so, Bradley is sent to a minimum security prison, or I think it's medium security prison. And he's kind of getting to a point, within this, first couple of days there that, prison is prison, but it's something that he might actually be able to contend with. But unfortunately, though, fate's not through with him. He has a visitor one day in the form of a rather placid individual played by Udo Kier, who in fact works for Eleazar. And Eleazar and his associates are wanting to get back at Bradley for his part in the transaction going south. And so, and to do so, Eleazar, even though he himself is incarcerated as well, has enough pull on the outside to have had Bradley's wife kidnapped. And through this placid individual who's telling him all this, Bradley finds out that, not only is his wife kidnapped, but Eleazar has called in an abortionist from Korea to do a rather gruesome procedure on the child while it's still alive in her mother's womb, if Bradley refuses to go along with Eleazar's demands. And Bradley's like, what do you want me to do? And so he's told that there's an old enemy of Eleazar's at a maximum security prison called Red Leaf. If Bradley can go to that prison facility, find that enemy, and kill him, then his debt with Eleazar will be squared, and while he himself will serve a rather lengthy sentence in a maximum security prison for all this, logically, at the very least, his wife will be set free, and the baby will not be harmed. And so Bradley's like, well, in case you haven't noticed, I'm here, I'm in this prison, I'm in this medium level security prison. How do I get from here to Red Leaf? And so he's told, show them you have to be transferred. And so, he has to find a way to get himself over there, and to do so, he basically starts going postal on the guards in this prison, to a point where he hospitalizes two of them and injures the other to a point where, some, treatment's required. But once this happens, though, the authorities are like, okay, this guy's crazy, send him to Redleaf. And so once he's sent to Redleaf, however, he's in a whole nother world, and it's run by a rather sadistic warden by the name of Warden Tuggs, as played by Don Johnson, in a rather non-Miami Vice type of role. And so Warden Tuggs basically, sets things up to where, he's saying, let me tell you, let me break it down in a way you can understand it. This is, some people call it a maximum security prison, but I call it minimum freedom. And so, basically, it's a very hellish prison. It's like a third world level prison in the United States of America. But once Bradley gets there, though, he finds out that there's a lot more going on than he had initially thought. And it's a rather complex revenge scheme set up by Eleazar. And so this was a very, very, fascinating movie, because, on one hand, I mean, it is, like a lot of people described, it's a sort of grindhouse, potboiler throwback, to the crime dramas of the 70s or the early 80s. But it also has a lot of depth to it, in the sense that, you see, a rather hardened individual who, they themselves are not a bad person, but out of, their own choices, are being put into a position where they're having to take part in criminal behavior in order to provide for their loved ones. And so Vince Vaughn, and as Bradley Thomas, gives what is easily one of his best performances within recent memory. And for any people who doubt that he can do something other than comedy, he proves it here. He proves them wrong here. And to be sure, he does have a sort of he does have some darkly comical moments, but it's a serious performance through and through, though. And and Bradley is a rather sympathetic protagonist, even though he is a part of the criminal underworld. We as the viewers, once as we get to know him, we see that he's genuinely not a bad person, but it's just, he feels that he doesn't really have any other alternatives other than to, say, be a drug courier for a former friend of his. And so when he's seeing that, there is a good payoff for this, it's kind of like, well, why stop now? And, that kind of thing. But he also has, his own level of standards, to a point of, say, where he had the opportunity to make a clean getaway in the police sting. He instead actually helps the police apprehend his partners. But in this case, though, that might have been because, his partners proved to be untrustworthy, just like he was, reading them. Basically, they proved him right. And so he was basically taking out criminals in his eyes who were worse than him. Or at the very least, he was helping the police to take out criminals who were worse than him, or who would have become worse than him. But unfortunately, though, he just didn't contend on Eleazar's revenge scheme. And it's a very horrifying predicament to be in. And there's a moment where, Vince Vaughn, gives an incredible, performance where, when he's interacting with the Placid guy, the one who's, telling him, this is what's going to happen to your wife and daughter. The guy tells him, don't, basically just stay calm, don't draw attention to us. Otherwise, I'm going to leave and you will regret this moment for the rest of your life. And so, you see Vince Vaughn just sort of tense up, but he doesn't flip out. He stays as calm as he can once this guy is showing him the pictures of his wife, and as well as what he's telling him is going to happen to his daughter if Bradley doesn't go along with their demands. And Vince Vaughn just gives Bradley this tension that even though his body is calm, it's like it's all in the eyes, or it's all in, say, the tensioning, the tense, the tense knuckles, that kind of thing. And it's a very quiet but very controlled performance, conveying the character's chaotic emotions that are going through his mind right at that moment. And like I said, it's definitely a strong performance by Vince Vaughn. But then when he has his moments alone with his wife, I mean, you see a lot more warmth come out of his character, and how he reserves that warmth for those he cares about. And so, Bradley is definitely a good character, and one that you can actually sympathize with. And, unfortunately, he's been put in a situation where he's having to do morally reprehensible things in order to survive, and not only for himself, but for his family as well. And so I also liked how he and his wife reconciled, because while she did cheat on him, once the two of them sat down and actually talked about things, Jennifer Carpenter did a good job of actually making Lauren into a understandable character. Like, you can understand why she cheated, but at the same time you can't bring yourself to hate her once she and Bradley actually sit down and talk. And Jennifer Carpenter had very good chemistry with Vince Vaughn, and it is something that felt like a snapshot from a moment in a real strained marriage. And so I thought the two of them played well off of each other. And so when she's kidnapped, you're definitely on edge and trying to find out, okay, how's her character going to turn out? Is she going to be okay? Is she going to survive this? Because when you find out what they're going to do to her baby, you're like, you're wanting these people to die, and you're wanting her to come out okay, and you're wanting Bradley to somehow succeed in getting her out of this situation. But you're like, how's he going to do that if he's in prison? And so the other thing I liked about this movie was just how at first it seems like something that takes place in everyday reality, just in the darker, seamier side of it. But once Bradley is transferred over to Redleaf, that's when it becomes full-on comic book purgatory, because it's like a prison within a prison. Once you get to a certain point in Redleaf, and it's like almost like Dante's Inferno, and like there's an increasing series of circles and hell and all that. And Redleaf is literally like a third world prison in a first world country. And you're kind of like, okay, how is he going to survive here, and how is he going to find the person he's looking for? So you're kind of on the edge of your seat in that regard. And also when you see just how stacked against him the deck is. And Warden Tuggs, as played by Don Johnson, he is a sadistic individual, but at the same time, though, it's not a sadism that is incomprehensible. Like, while yes, he is sadistic, you can at least understand why his character is sadistic, in a sense that he's been tasked with minding the worst of the worst in society. And so you basically in his mind, you've got to fight fire with fire, or you have to become a monster in order to keep monsters down. And so you at the very least can understand why Tuggs is the way he is. But at the same time, though, there are moments where he steps over the line, especially in the ways in which he's needlessly cruel to the character of Bradley, who, as far as he knows, yes, Bradley is a redneck who likes to breaks. He likes to break the arms of guards, and so understandably, Tuggs and his people and his guards aren't too fond of Bradley, and so that's why some of their sadism is directed at him, because it's like, hey, you want to take us on, pal. And so I thought that was an interesting portrayal on Don Johnson's part, because I know that Don Johnson, he can do, stuff other than, say, Miami Vice. He's a good actor. But seeing him in the role where he was kind of a bad guy, I'm not going to say he was a complete bad guy, because you at least understand why his character is the way he is in the environment he's in. And there comes a point, I don't want to say too much, but there does come a point where he develops a certain level of respect for Bradley. It's the kind of respect that someone has for an individual who is doomed and they know they're doomed, but they're staying, by their own, moral standards. It's that kind of respect, if that makes any sense. I don't want to say, much more than that, because I might spoil some stuff. But, Don Johnson definitely gives a rather nuanced performance for the type of role that he's playing, in a sense of the sadistic warden. And also, though, I like the certain level of twists that came into play, because at first you're thinking that he's gonna have to survive in this medium level security prison, but then it turns out that no, that actually would have been a good prison to serve out your time in. But then, of course, once he gets over to Redleaf, there's a twist of his wife being kidnapped and the impending death of, or I guess you could say their daughter being threatened with a rather horrific form of torture. And so, of course, he has to find a way to get himself into Redleaf. But then once he gets into Redleaf and he gets to a certain point, then he starts finding out some, rather, crazy things, which, you realize that, yeah, he's basically the target of a really extensive revenge scheme. But, and so, his actions from that point onward, or it's like, fight or flight, do what you have to do to survive, and make sure that whatever happens, your wife and daughter come out of this okay. And so, yeah, I liked how, you had this character who is constantly having to adapt to an ever-changing, ever-chaotic situation. First there was, him losing his job and finding out that his wife cheated on him, but he was able to bounce back from that, not without some trouble, though. But then, of course, he's put in this situation wherein, he was on the money about, his fellow couriers, not being up to the job, but it's like, hey, I can't go against my boss here, so, I'm doing what I have to do here. But at the same time, it's like, I told you I was right, and so it's interesting to see Vince Vaughn play this kind of character who oftentimes is proven to be right, but because of the world he's in, no one listens to him until it's too late. And unfortunately, the person who, one of the people that is, the most prone to, suffering from, fate's kickback is him, even though he's right a good amount of the time. And so I guess that was one of the things that I appreciated as well, is that, much like Bone Tomahawk before it, even though there's a kind of surreal quality to, the environment of the movie, it's not above showing you, the harsh reality of life, in a sense that, no matter what kind of person you are, you might one day be hit with something that you haven't even conceived. And it's like, how do you react to that? How do you adapt to that? And in this case, you have Bradley, who is not, unfamiliar with the prison system, but at the same time, he he didn't think about, what would happen if he was put in a situation like the one he's in, because he never imagined he would be in a situation like he's in. So, I mean, having to serve some time is one thing, but being put through this Dante's Inferno-like prison situation, not so much. But so yeah, it's a movie that kind of keeps you guessing, even if you can tell where it's going to go. There's enough ambiguity and twisted reality at work here to where you're like, you want to see how things turn out, and sometimes you might not even be able to guess how they're going to turn out. So I thought that this was a really good movie. It was like, yes, it was a throwback, to crime dramas and exploitation films from, say, like the 70s or 80s in some ways, but at the same time, I mean, it was a very human area, of examination, it was a film that examined, what one man's, spiritual and moral psyche is made up of, and, how it stacks up against, how the unpredictable nature of life, the criminal underworld in this case. And what he was willing to do, for the safety of his loved ones. But yeah, I really enjoyed this movie. I will say that the slow burn nature of the movie might not be to everyone's tastes, but it's something that I would encourage you, if you have the stomach for this material, because it gets dark really quickly. But if you have the stomach for it, just go along with the slow burn ride, because it's very rewarding. Once the sparks ignite, as it were. And the other thing I was going to say is that the violence in this movie, it is brutal. I mean, it's not like there's something gruesome happening every 5 seconds, but at the same time, it's like there's a slow build up, and to where we get to know certain characters and everything, and there's like the mounting tension, and then once something violent happens, boom, the tension just explodes. And like, that varies. I mean, on one hand you got Vince Vaughn, or Bradley, barehandedly destroying his wife's car, and then you have rather brutal shootout, and then you have him in an attempt to get transferred to Redleaf, starting a brawl with the guards in the medium security prison and literally breaking limbs. And then once he gets to Redleaf, all hell breaks loose. And I will say that there's a rather brutal kill in once he gets to Redleaf, wherein one guy is literally dragged face first on the concrete to the point where his flesh is peeled off as it's being dragged across the concrete floor, to a point when Bradley, kicks the guy over after he's finished dragging him, because yes, he and this guy to get into a fight, and Bradley, gets the upper hand, gets the guy on the ground, puts his boot or his foot right on the guy's skull, on his back right here, and he's saying, he's basically telling the other guys to back off or he's going to kill him. They don't back off, and so he drags the guy across the floor just with his foot, and to a point where you see sparks coming up and blood just start pooling. And then when he kicks the guy over, you literally see that the guy's face has been peeled off and his skull is just like glistening. It's a kill that you don't expect to see. I mean, the brutality in this movie, like, it wasn't unfamiliar, considering the material and the nature of the plot. But at the same time, when it got to that kill, it was just like, oh my god. Not quite as harsh as the signature kill from Bone Tomahawk. You've seen that movie, you know what I'm talking about. It's not quite that harsh, but it's still one of those moments where you're like, ugh, but at the same time, it's not something that feels wholly alien to the situation. in terms of this type of surreal reality. And once everything starts taking off in the red leaf sequence, that kill does not feel out of place. Harsh, but not out of place. But yeah, it's definitely something that I would say that if you're a fan of Vince Vaughn and you have a strong stomach, this is definitely worth checking out. If you like slow burn throwback crime dramas, this is worth checking out. I will say that there are parts where I realize this is supposed to be kind of like a surreal version of reality in some way, but I do feel like that there are moments that strained credibility. Not so much like with the violence, but more with, say, characters and their actions. Namely, in the case of Bradley, while I do get that, him helping out the police against his own fellow couriers, I mean, it was trying to show that Bradley was, it was trying to show that Bradley at heart was a decent guy who was trying to take out, guys who were worse than him. But at the same time, like, he literally had a chance to get away clean. And so when he chooses to, go in and get involved, that was a moment where I was kind of like, dude, you literally could have gotten away and, no one would have blamed you, that kind of thing. And so that part, it was kind of like, I feel like if they maybe played around with it a bit, like maybe, I don't know, gone into, say, some of his background as to say why he would have done something like he did, as opposed to say, getting away scot-free. I mean, I feel like maybe that sequence would have made a little more sense. But at the same time, though, I just, like, I'm not going to say it doesn't ruin anything, but at the same time, it is one of those moments where, like, dude, really? Just as far as, his action, not necessarily with him as a character, but just that moment, though, if that makes sense. Also, you get that bit where, I was kind of wondering, like, okay, I understand that he's under a lot of stress. I hope to God I never find myself in a situation anywhere close to the one he's in, in the sense of, having one of your loved ones kidnapped and, having something unspeakable being threatened to be done to, your unborn child and stuff like that. But at the same time, I mean, I was kind of like, why didn't he, talk to someone in authority on this? I mean, why didn't he at least try to say, hey, this guy I helped put away is threatening my family, and considering I actually helped you guys out, I mean, you guys owe me one. I mean, I was trying to figure out why he didn't do something like that, but then again, because of the nature of the situation and the stress he was under, I mean, maybe he wasn't thinking too clearly. But then again, maybe this was just a case of, Eleazar basically having that much power. Like, maybe some of the guards at the prison that Bradley was in, the medium security prison, were under Eleazar's payroll. Because, I mean, once he gets to Red Leaf, well, you find out that, yeah, Eleazar has some pull in there. But it could have been something similar with the medium security bit. But I wish that maybe, at the very least, they could have acknowledged the possibility of Bradley asking for help or going to the authorities about this. And because, I mean, they just wanted some names, and he obviously had access to the names. But that was, before, his wife was kidnapped. And so, I mean, it would have been interesting seeing Bradley, at the very least, giving that, some consideration. But instead, I mean, he doesn't even think about it. He just goes straight to, okay, start breaking guards' limbs, in order to get transferred to Red Leaf. And so, I mean, it's one of those things where I understand it in a sense of, I understand him as a character, I think, because at that point, it's like, he couldn't see the forest through the trees. All he knew was that his wife was kidnapped, and his unborn daughter was going to have the unspeakable done to her, but and he couldn't even think of any other possibility as to how to get them out of there, or but at the same time I wish that they could have shown him thinking about other possibilities or other ways to get out of the situation, or to get his wife and daughter out of the situation. But maybe if they had shown that Eleazar just had that much power, or something like that, beyond where he was incarcerated. I mean, I think if they had done something like that, then at the very least there would have been some form of justification for Bradley to just go, straight from hearing that his wife's kidnapped to, okay, I'm breaking arms in order to get out of here, that kind of thing. And also, this is much like Bone Tomahawk. This is a very, very grim movie. I would say that while Bone Tomahawk was definitely harsher, once it gets to that third act of the movie, once it goes from Western to straight up horror in that last third of the movie, I mean, yes, Bone Tomahawk is definitely harsher than Brawl in Cell Block 99, but in terms of straight up atmosphere, though, I think Cell Block 99 probably takes the cake, because it's a very repressive, harsh atmosphere. And the only times in which there seems to be any sort of optimism, are strained with a sort of, bittersweet quality. In a sense that, say, for instance, a conversation with, Bradley and his wife. I mean, it's a moment, like, there are moments like that where, for the rest of the movie, it's very harshly lit, very, dark, seamy looking. But, then there'll be these brief moments he has with his wife where the lighting is, still on the seedy side of things, but at the same time, there's a little bit more spark and flare to the lighting, showing, I guess, that, there is some measure of hope, for these two to, work things out. And plus, you see that once the two of them start talking again, you see why, Bradley, cares about his wife as much as he does, And so I find it fitting that, the moments where, the lighting actually kind of perked up a bit whenever she was involved, or the two of them were having a conversation about things, I found it fitting that, the film actually started to, go out of its way to show, some measure of, like, brightness, I guess. Not to say that you can't see what's going on through the rest of the movie. It's just that, because of the atmosphere and how dark it is, though, some viewers might find the film to be kind of repressive. But, yeah, so, excuse me. That being said, though, if you have a strong stomach and if you have an appreciation for, gritty crime dramas, and you want to see Vince Vaughn in one of the best performances of his career, Brawl in Cell Block 99 is a good movie. I'm going to go ahead and give Cell Block 99 4 out of 5 stars. This was a good movie, a grim movie, but a good one. And so, as far as special features go, this is the DVD, but you got Journey to the Brawl, the making of Brawl in Cell Block 99, which is a very good making of featurette in which you see and hear from various people involved with the movie, including the director, who actually seems like a pretty cool dude. And you also have Beyond Fest Q&A with the cast and crew. I haven't watched that one yet, but it's like one of those deals where it's like there was like a sit down with some of the people and fielding questions from the audience. But and also you have a few trailers and what have you. But yeah, this was a good movie though, a grim movie, but a good one. So thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review. You got any questions, comments? Please feel free to drop a line. Let me know. I'm always open to some feedback. If you like what you see here, please hit that like button and subscribe. But regardless of where you are or who you are, y'all stay safe out there. Have a good night. Take care. Bye.